It was one of those evenings when everything felt perfectly quiet. Rain was tapping against the windows and David was sitting at his desk, finishing up some work on his laptop. The house was peaceful, just the way he liked it after long days at the office. He'd made himself a cup of tea, put on some soft music, and was finally getting through emails he'd been avoiding all week. Then the doorbell rang. Once, twice, 3 times in quick succession. David frowned and glanced at the clock. It was almost 9 in the evening. He wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, he thought about ignoring it. Maybe it was just some kids playing around in the neighborhood. But then the doorbell rang again, longer this time, more insistent. He got up from his chair and walked to the front door, peering through the peephole. What he saw made his heart sink. His younger sister, Lisa, was standing on his doorstep. Her hair was plastered to her face from the rain, and she had 2 old suitcases beside her. Even through the distorted view of the peephole, David could see she looked exhausted, almost defeated. Her clothes were wrinkled, her shoulders slumped forward like she was carrying the weight of the world. David's hand hovered over the doorknob. His mind raced back to the last time Lisa had shown up like this, about 8 months ago. She'd stayed for a week, promised she was getting her life together, and then disappeared in the middle of the night with $200 from his wallet and his grandmother's gold watch. He'd spent weeks trying to track her down, calling hospitals and shelters, worried sick. When she finally called, she'd made excuses, said she'd pay him back, said she was sorry. But the watch never came back, and neither did the trust. The doorbell rang again. David took a deep breath and opened the door. Lisa looked up at him with those same eyes he'd known since they were kids, but there was something different now. Something darker, more desperate. Her cheeks were hollow, her skin pale, and when she smiled weakly at him, he noticed her hands were shaking. "Hey, big brother," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of rain. "Can I come in?" David didn't move. He stood there, blocking the doorway, trying to find the right words. Part of him wanted to slam the door, protect himself from another round of heartbreak. Another part of him saw his little sister, the girl who used to share her lunch with him at school, the one who'd stayed up all night helping him study for exams. Before he could answer, Lisa picked up her suitcases and pushed past him into the house. She wasn't aggressive about it, just tired, like she didn't have the energy to wait for permission anymore. David turned around and watched as she walked straight to the living room couch and dropped her bags on the floor. "Lisa, you can't just..." he started, but she'd already collapsed onto the couch, curling up into a ball. Within minutes, she was asleep. Or maybe she'd just shut down. David couldn't tell anymore. He stood there for a long moment, listening to the rain and watching his sister's chest rise and fall with each breath. She looked so small, so fragile. This wasn't the Lisa he remembered from their childhood. The confident girl who'd always had a plan, who'd dreamed of becoming a photographer and traveling the world. David walked over to her bags, feeling guilty, but knowing he needed to understand what was happening. One of the suitcases had a broken zipper, and he could see clothes spilling out. As he bent down to zip it properly, a piece of paper fell out from the side pocket. It was an eviction notice. His stomach turned as he read the date. 3 weeks ago. Lisa had been evicted from her apartment 3 weeks ago, and this was the first he was hearing about it. Where had she been staying all this time? He looked at her again, really looked at her, and that's when he noticed the marks on her arms. Small, dark bruises that formed a pattern he recognized from news reports and awareness campaigns. His chest tightened. He'd suspected it before, had worried about it during their last conversation months ago when she'd seemed scattered and unfocused on the phone, but seeing the evidence right there in front of him made it real in a way that shattered something inside him. David walked to the kitchen and sat down at the small table where he ate his meals alone. The tea he'd made earlier had gone cold. He poured it down the sink and just stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to process everything. His phone buzzed. A text from his ex-wife checking in about something mundane. He ignored it. His mind was spinning with questions. How had Lisa gotten to this point? Why hadn't their father said anything? Why hadn't she reached out sooner? But even as he asked himself these questions, he knew some of the answers. After Lisa's car accident 2 years ago, she'd been prescribed strong pain medication for her injuries. The prescription had run out, but the pain and the dependence hadn't. Then her husband had left her, taking their daughter across the state. The custody battle had drained her financially and emotionally, David had watched from a distance as his sister spiraled, wanting to help but not knowing how, and eventually pulling back when his own help seemed to make things worse. He'd given her money that went to substances instead of rent. He'd believed lies about job interviews that never happened. He'd covered for her with their father, making excuses when she didn't show up for family dinners. And every time he'd told himself he was helping her, being a good brother, but his therapist had used a different word during their sessions, enabling. David looked at the clock. It was past 10 now. He thought about waking Lisa up and having this conversation right away, but she looked so peaceful sleeping there. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow morning they would talk, and this time things would be different. This time he would set real boundaries. This time he wouldn't let his guilt and love for his sister cloud his judgment. He grabbed a blanket from the hallway closet and gently draped it over her. Lisa stirred slightly but didn't wake up. For just a moment David let himself remember her as she used to be, the sister who'd taught him how to ride a bike. The one who'd punched Tommy Richards in the nose for making fun of David's stutter in 5th grade. The girl who'd cried happy tears at his wedding and promised to always be there for him. That girl was still in there somewhere. He had to believe that, but believing it and knowing how to help were two very different things. David turned off most of the lights, leaving just a small lamp on in case Lisa woke up during the night. He went to his bedroom but knew he wouldn't sleep. He lay there in the darkness, listening to the rain, thinking about the conversation they'd need to have in the morning, and wondering if this time his sister had finally hit the bottom she needed to hit, or if there were still darker places she could fall. Morning came too quickly. David had barely slept, drifting in and out of anxious dreams. When he finally got up around 6, he made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, rehearsing what he needed to say. By the time Lisa woke up around 8, he'd gone through a dozen different versions of the conversation in his head. She shuffled into the kitchen, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, looking even smaller in the morning light. Her hair was messy and she wouldn't meet his eyes. "Coffee?" David offered, keeping his voice neutral. "Please," she whispered. He poured her a cup and sat down across from her at the table. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both of them knowing this conversation was coming, but neither wanting to start it. Finally, David spoke. "Lisa, we need to talk about what's going on." She nodded slowly, still staring into her coffee cup. "You can stay here," he said, and he saw her shoulders relax slightly. "But there are conditions, non-negotiable conditions." Now she looked up at him, her eyes wary. 2 weeks, he continued. "You can stay for 2 weeks. In that time, you need to get into a treatment program, a real one. I'll help you find it, I'll help you apply, but you have to actually do the work." "I will," Lisa said quickly. "I promise, David. I really want to get better this time." It was the this time that made David's heart hurt. How many times had they been here before? How many promises had been made and broken? "I'm serious, Lisa. No substances in this house, none. You go to meetings every day. You look for a job, even if it's just part-time. You check in with me about where you're going and when you'll be back. And if I catch you lying or taking anything from this house, you're out immediately. No second chances." Lisa nodded eagerly. "I understand. Thank you, David. Really, thank you so much. I won't let you down." But David had heard these words before, and they rang hollow in his ears. The first few days were surprisingly good. Lisa seemed genuinely committed. She woke up early, made her bed, even helped with dishes and cleaning around the house. She found a support group meeting nearby and showed David the schedule. She spent hours on his laptop looking at job postings and filling out applications. David started to feel hopeful. Maybe this time really would be different. Maybe she'd finally reached that turning point people talked about, where the pain of continuing was finally greater than the fear of changing. On the 3rd evening, Lisa came home from a meeting and actually seemed lighter, more like her old self. She told David about a woman she'd met at the group who had been clean for 5 years and was now running her own small business. "If she can do it, maybe I can too," Lisa said, and David saw a spark in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. That night, they ordered pizza and watched an old movie they'd loved as kids. Lisa laughed at the funny parts, made comments about the bad special effects, and for a few hours, David felt like he had his sister back. He went to bed that night feeling grateful, feeling like maybe his gamble had paid off. The next day, David had meetings all afternoon and didn't get home until almost 5. Usually Lisa was back by then from her afternoon meeting, but the house was empty. He called her phone. No answer. He texted her. Nothing. An hour passed. Then another. David's anxiety grew with each passing minute. He paced around the house, checking his phone constantly, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. Finally, around 7, he heard a key in the door. Lisa came in, avoiding his gaze, heading straight for the guest room. "Where were you?" David asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Just out. Went for a walk after the meeting. For 3 hours? I needed to clear my head, okay? Stop interrogating me." The defensiveness in her voice set off alarm bells in David's mind. He followed her down the hallway. "Lisa, look at me." She turned around and he could see it immediately. Her pupils were different. Her movements were just slightly off. She was high. "Are you serious right now?" David's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "It's been less than a week, Lisa, less than a week. I didn't," she stammered, but the lie was written all over her face. David felt something break inside him. Not his heart this time. Something harder. His resolve, maybe, or his ability to keep making excuses for her. He walked past her to the guest room and started looking around. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. In the closet, under some clothes, was an old shoebox. Inside was everything he'd feared. A small bag of pills, some cash, and a receipt from a pawn shop. His blood ran cold as he looked at the receipt. 2 days ago, while he'd been at work, it listed several items, but one made his hands shake. Pearl necklace, antique. His mother's necklace. The one she'd worn on her wedding day. The one she'd given to David before she passed away, making him promise to keep it in the family. It had been in his bedroom dresser, in a small jewelry box he rarely opened. He hadn't even thought to check on it because he'd trusted Lisa. Despite everything, some part of him had still trusted her. He walked back out to the living room where Lisa was sitting on the couch, her face in her hands. He held up the receipt. "Mom's necklace?" His voice was barely a whisper. "You took Mom's necklace?" Lisa looked up and tears were streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, David. I was going to get it back. I just needed a little bit to get through. Just enough to feel okay. I was going to get it back before you even noticed." "A little bit to get through?" David repeated, his voice getting louder. "You're supposed to be getting clean, Lisa. You're supposed to be trying." "I'm trying," she shouted back. "Do you know how hard this is? Do you have any idea what it feels like? Then get real help. That's what I'm asking you to do. But instead you steal from me and lie to me and use in my house." They stared at each other, both breathing hard. Years of frustration and pain and love and disappointment hanging in the air between them. Lisa suddenly stood up and walked to the guest room. She came back out a minute later with her 2 suitcases, the same ones she'd arrived with less than a week ago. "I'll just go," she said quietly. "I'll figure something out." She walked toward the front door, but when she got to the doorway, she stopped. She stood there for a long moment, her back to David, holding those worn suitcases. Then she turned around and looked at him. Her eyes were red from crying. Her face was streaked with tears, but there was something else there too. A challenge. A question. Maybe even a plea. "Are you going to stop me?" she asked. And in that moment, David realized this was the real test. Not whether he would let her stay, not whether he would give her money or help or support, but whether he would physically stop her from walking out that door and back into the life that was slowly destroying her. Time seemed to freeze. David stood in his living room, looking at his sister standing in the doorway, and felt the weight of that question crushing down on him. "Are you going to stop me?" 4 years old, sitting on the school bus, and some older kid was making fun of the way he talked. Lisa, only 6 herself, had stood up and told that kid to leave her brother alone. When he didn't, she'd grabbed David's hand and they'd sat together the rest of the year. Every single day. 8 years old, his first science fair project, and he'd been so nervous he'd thrown up in the bathroom. Lisa had helped him practice his presentation 50 times until he could do it in his sleep. He'd won 3rd place, and she'd been more excited than he was, 13 years old, when their mom had gotten really sick for the first time. Lisa had taken over cooking dinners, making sure David did his homework, keeping things normal when everything was falling apart. She'd been 15, just a kid herself, but she'd held their small family together. 17, when David's girlfriend had broken up with him right before prom. Lisa had spent the whole night watching movies with him. eating ice cream, telling him he was too good for her anyway. She'd made him laugh when all he wanted to do was feel sorry for himself. But there were other memories too. More recent ones. 2 years ago, when Lisa had called him at 3 in the morning from a hospital. She'd wrecked her car, was lucky to be alive. David had rushed there, had held her hand while they set her broken arm, had driven her home and helped her file the insurance claims. The doctor had given her pain medication. Strong stuff. She'd needed it at first, but then she'd needed it even when the pain was gone. 18 months ago, when her husband had left, Lisa had called David crying, barely able to form words. Her daughter, little Amy, was only 3 years old. The divorce had been ugly, and the custody battle had been worse. David had loaned her money for a lawyer, had let her stay with him for 2 weeks. But then she'd started missing meetings with her attorney, showing up late to court dates. He'd seen the signs but hadn't wanted to believe them. A year ago, when their father had asked David if Lisa seemed okay. David had lied, said she was just going through a hard time. He'd covered for her at family dinners, made excuses when she didn't show up. He'd told himself he was protecting her, giving her space to figure things out. 8 months ago, the last time she'd shown up like this. She'd stayed for a week, seemed like she was getting better. Then she'd disappeared, and so had his money and his grandmother's watch. He'd searched for her for weeks, terrified he'd get a call from the police or worse. When she'd finally contacted him, she'd sworn she'd pay him back, but he'd never seen the watch again. David's therapist, Dr. Chen, had been gentle but firm during their sessions. "There's a difference between helping someone and enabling them," she'd said. "When you give money to someone who's actively using, you're not helping them pay rent. You're funding their next fix. When you lie to family members to cover up their behavior, you're not protecting them. You're protecting the problem." It had been hard to hear. David had argued at first. "But she's my sister. I can't just abandon her." "Setting boundaries isn't abandonment," Dr. Chen had replied. "In fact, sometimes boundaries are the most loving thing you can offer. Sometimes people need to face the full consequences of their choices before they're ready to change." Standing there now, looking at Lisa in the doorway, David understood what Dr. Chen had meant. If he physically stopped Lisa from leaving, if he blocked the door and convinced her to stay, what would he really be doing? He'd be taking away her choice. He'd be deciding for her that she needed to stay, that she needed help, that she should get clean. But that wasn't his decision to make. It had never been his decision to make. Lisa had to choose this for herself. She had to want recovery more than she wanted the temporary relief of using. And as much as it tore him apart inside, David couldn't want it for her. He couldn't force her into being ready. "No," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "No, I'm not going to stop you." He saw something flicker across Lisa's face. Surprise, maybe, or disappointment, or perhaps relief that she wouldn't have to fight him. "But I'm not giving up on you either," David continued. He walked to his desk and pulled out a piece of paper where he'd written down information days ago, hoping he wouldn't need it. "This is a long-term residential treatment center about an hour from here. They have a good program, 90 days minimum. They help with job placement and housing after." He held out the paper to her. "I'll pay for 3 months. The full program. But only if you commit to the whole thing. Not a week, not 2 weeks. The whole 90 days, whatever they say you need to complete." Lisa took the paper but didn't look at it. She just stared at David. "You need real help, Lisa. Not a couch to crash on for a few days. Not money to tide you over. Real professional help. And you have to choose it. I can't choose it for you." "And if I don't?" Lisa asked quietly. "Then you walk out that door and I let you go." "I don't chase you. I don't send money. I don't cover for you with Dad. I love you, Lisa. I always will. But I can't keep watching you destroy yourself while pretending I'm helping." Tears were running down both their faces now. "The necklace," Lisa started. "I'll get the necklace back myself tomorrow," David said. "That's not on you. But everything else is. Your recovery, your sobriety, your life. That's all on you. And I believe you can do it, but only if you really want to." Lisa stood there for another long moment, looking at the paper in her hand, then at her brother, then at the door. She was making a calculation David had seen her make before, weighing her options, trying to figure out the path of least resistance. Finally, she picked up her suitcases again and walked out the door. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't look back. She just left. David stood there listening to her footsteps on the porch, hearing them fade away. He wanted to run after her. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to chase her down, bring her back, lock the doors, do whatever it took to keep her safe. But he didn't. He closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor, and then he cried. He cried for his sister, for their mother who wasn't here to see this, for that little girl who used to protect him on the school bus, for the woman who was walking away into the darkness with nowhere safe to go. After a while, he got up and called his father. Dad, Lisa was here. She just left. If she shows up at your place, don't give her money. I know that sounds harsh, but just listen to me. He spent 20 minutes explaining the situation, explaining the boundaries he'd set, explaining what enabling meant. His father didn't understand at first, got angry, accused David of being heartless, but eventually he agreed to be consistent. Then David called the pawn shop. They were closed, but he left a message asking about the necklace, saying he'd be there first thing in the morning. He didn't sleep that night. He kept imagining Lisa out there somewhere, cold and alone and desperate. He picked up his phone 100 times, thinking about calling her, texting her, trying one more time. But he didn't. The next morning he drove to the pawn shop as soon as they opened. The necklace was there, and he paid to get it back. Holding it in his hands, he remembered his mother wearing it, remembered her smile, remembered her last words to him about taking care of the family. "I'm trying, Mom," he whispered. "I'm really trying." He put the necklace in a safe deposit box at the bank. He couldn't risk keeping it in the house anymore, and somehow that made him sadder than anything else. He was protecting an object from his own sister. That became David's new routine. Work, home, therapy sessions. Waiting, wondering. Hoping his phone would ring, but terrified of what the news might be when it finally did. 3 weeks and 2 days. That's how long it had been since Lisa walked out. 23 days of silence that felt like an eternity. David tried to keep busy. He took on extra projects at work, stayed late at the office, anything to keep his mind occupied. But every time his phone buzzed, his heart would race. Every time he saw a news report about someone found unconscious or worse, his stomach would drop. He'd drive home taking different routes, scanning faces on street corners, looking for her. He knew it was pointless. The city was too big and Lisa could be anywhere. But he couldn't help himself. His father called every few days. "Any word?" he'd ask, and David would have to say no. Their father was angry at first, blamed David for letting her leave. But as the weeks went on, his anger turned to worry, and his worry turned to quiet grief. They'd both lost someone before, their mother. The possibility of losing Lisa too was almost unbearable. David's ex-wife, Jennifer, reached out one evening. "I heard about Lisa," she said when he answered the phone. "Are you okay?" It was strange hearing her voice. They'd been divorced for almost 2 years, and their conversations had been brief and businesslike since then. But there was genuine concern in her tone now. "Not really," David admitted. "I'm sorry. I know you two were close." They talked for a while, and Jennifer reminded him that he'd done the right thing. "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved," she said. "I learned that with my brother." Jennifer's brother had struggled with similar issues years ago. He'd eventually gotten clean, but only after hitting what he called his rock bottom. "Everyone's bottom is different," Jennifer said. "Some people need to lose everything before they're ready to rebuild." The conversation helped, but it didn't ease the knot of anxiety that lived in David's chest now. He thought about filing a missing person report. Spent one evening sitting at his computer with the police department's website pulled up. But Lisa was an adult. She'd left voluntarily. Unless there was evidence of foul play, there wasn't much they could do. She wasn't missing. She was just gone. David went to a support group for families of people dealing with these problems. He sat in a church basement with a dozen other people who understood exactly what he was going through. Everyone had a story. Everyone had someone they'd lost or were losing. One woman had been coming to meetings for 5 years. Her son had been clean for 3 years now, but she still came, still needed the support. "The hardest thing I ever did," she told the group, "was telling my son no, watching him walk out that door with nowhere to go." But that night was the night he finally made the choice. Not me, not his father, not his therapist, him. David held on to that story like a lifeline. On day 19, he got a call from an unknown number. His hands shook as he answered. "Hello? Is this David Sullivan?" A woman's voice, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes." This is Officer Martinez with the city police. Do you have a sister named Lisa Sullivan? His legs went weak and he had to sit down. This was the call he'd been dreading. Yes, is she okay? She's fine, the officer said quickly, hearing the panic in his voice. She was arrested for shoplifting 2 days ago. Small stuff, food mostly. She spent a night in our holding facility. I'm calling because she listed you as her emergency contact. David's relief that she was alive was mixed with despair at the circumstances. Where is she now? She was released yesterday morning. The store declined to press charges when they heard her situation. But before she left, our social worker talked to her. Lisa agreed to let us contact you. Can I talk to her? That's why I'm calling. She wanted me to tell you something. There was a pause, papers rustling. She said to tell you she called the number. The treatment center. She checked herself in yesterday afternoon. David couldn't speak for a moment. She what? The Riverside Recovery Center about an hour north of here? Our social worker, Kelly, she drove Lisa there herself, made sure she got in okay. I called them this morning to follow up. Lisa completed intake and is starting the detox process. She'll be there for a while. Is she? Can I visit her? Not yet. They have a policy. No contact with family for the first 2 weeks. But after that, they have family therapy sessions on Saturdays. You'd need to call them and get on the schedule. After the call ended, David sat in his car in the parking lot of the grocery store where he'd stopped on his way home from work. He just sat there, phone in his hand, trying to process what he'd just learned. Lisa had hit her bottom. She'd been arrested, spent a night in jail, had nothing and nowhere to go. And instead of calling him to bail her out, to give her money to fix things like he always had before, she'd called the treatment center. She'd chosen recovery. He called his father immediately. For the first time in 3 weeks, his father's voice had something other than worry in it. She's really doing it? His father asked. She's really doing it. 2 weeks felt longer than the 3 weeks of silence had. David worked, went to his support group, talked to his therapist about what it would be like when he finally saw Lisa again. Dr. Chen helped him prepare for the family session, helped him understand that recovery was a long road, that this was just the beginning. She's going to need boundaries, Dr. Chen said. Clear ones. She's going to need you to be consistent, to follow through. Love isn't always comfortable. Sometimes love means being firm. David called the treatment center and got on the schedule for the first available family session. They told him Lisa was doing well, engaging with the program, attending all the required sessions. They wouldn't tell him much more than that, privacy policies, but just knowing she was okay was enough. Finally, Saturday came. David drove the hour to Riverside Recovery Center, his palms sweating on the steering wheel. The facility was nicer than he'd expected. A renovated house on a quiet street with a garden in front. He checked in at the front desk, and a counselor named Robert led him to a small office. Lisa will be here in a few minutes, Robert said. This first session is going to be intense. We'll be here to facilitate, but we need both of you to be honest. That means hearing things that might be hard to hear. Are you ready for that? David nodded, even though he wasn't sure he was ready at all. Then the door opened and Lisa walked in. She looked different. Clean for one thing. Her hair was washed and pulled back in a ponytail. She'd gained a little weight and her skin looked healthier. But it was her eyes that struck him most. They were clear, focused, really seeing him for the first time in years. Hi, she said softly. Hi, David replied. They sat down, Robert between them, and began the hardest conversation they'd ever had. Lisa took responsibility for what she'd done, but she also expressed anger. Anger at feeling abandoned. Anger at David for setting boundaries. Anger at their father for not understanding. Anger at her ex-husband, at the doctors who'd prescribed the pills, at the world for being so hard. Robert helped them untangle it all, helped David understand that Lisa's anger wasn't really about him. It was about her own pain, her own shame, her own fear. When you didn't stop me that night, Lisa said, tears streaming down her face. Part of me hated you for it, but another part of me knew it was what I needed. I needed to make the choice myself. David cried too. He told her about the sleepless nights, the fear, the drives around the city looking for her. He told her about getting the necklace back, about the support group, about how hard it had been to let her walk away. By the end of the session, they weren't fixed. Far from it, but they understood each other better, and they both understood that this was going to be a long journey, one they'd have to take one day at a time. 6 months changed everything and nothing at all. The calendar said half a year had passed since that family session at Riverside, but recovery didn't work on a simple timeline. Some days felt like progress, like they were all moving forward together. Other days felt like they were right back at the beginning. Lisa completed the 90-day program at Riverside. David attended family sessions twice a month, learning about the disease, learning about his own behavior patterns, learning that love sometimes meant saying no. Their father came to a few sessions too, though he found it harder to open up. After Riverside, Lisa moved into a sober living house across town. It was a structured environment: drug testing, curfews, mandatory meetings. She shared a room with another woman in recovery, worked in the house kitchen, and slowly started rebuilding her life. David visited every other Sunday. They'd go for coffee or take walks in the park. The conversations were different now, more honest, less dancing around the truth. Lisa talked about her struggles openly. She told him about the cravings that still hit her out of nowhere, about the shame she carried, about how hard it was to face what she'd done. "I think about Amy every day," she said one Sunday afternoon as they sat on a park bench. Her daughter, who she hadn't seen in over a year. "I wonder if she remembers me, if she hates me for leaving. She's 4, David reminded her gently. "She won't understand everything right now, but someday you'll be able to explain. When you're ready." Lisa had started the process of requesting supervised visitation. It was slow, complicated by her history, but her counselor at the sober house was helping her navigate the legal system. There were no guarantees, but there was hope. She'd also found a job at a coffee shop near the sober living house. It wasn't glamorous, but she was good at it. Her manager knew her situation and was supportive. Lisa even started taking pictures again, carrying a cheap camera David had given her for her birthday. Nothing professional, just shots of the neighborhood, the people she met, the moments that struck her. It reminded him of the sister he'd known before everything fell apart, but it wasn't all progress. There was a close call in month 4. Lisa called David one night, crying, saying she'd almost relapsed. She'd run into an old friend, someone from her using days, and the temptation had been overwhelming. Instead of using, she'd called her sponsor, called the crisis line, called David. She'd made it through, but it had scared both of them. "It doesn't just go away," she told him afterward. "I thought after 90 days I'd feel different, like I'd be cured or something. But it's always there, waiting." David learned to sit with that discomfort, to understand that recovery wasn't a destination but an ongoing journey. On a Sunday in early spring, 6 months after Lisa had checked into Riverside, David picked her up from the sober house earlier than usual. She came out wearing a nice dress she'd borrowed from her roommate, her hair done carefully, her hands shaking. "You okay?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. They drove across the city to a playground in a neighborhood David didn't know well. Lisa had been granted her first supervised visit with Amy. 2 hours supervised by a social worker in a public place. David waited in the car while Lisa walked to the playground. He could see her from where he was parked, could see the moment when her ex-husband arrived with Amy. The little girl had grown so much. She was 4.5 now, all long legs and bright eyes. At first, Amy hid behind her father's legs. Lisa knelt down, keeping her distance, just talking softly. David couldn't hear what she was saying, but he could see the social worker taking notes, could see Lisa's patience as Amy slowly warmed up to her. After about 15 minutes, Amy took a tentative step forward, then another. Then she was showing Lisa something, a toy she'd brought. Lisa's face lit up with joy that David could see even from across the parking lot. 2 hours later, Lisa climbed back into the car. She was crying, but they were happy tears this time. "She remembered me," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "She called me Mama. I didn't think she would remember, but she did." The visit wasn't perfect. Amy had been shy, cautious, clearly unsure about this woman who looked familiar, but had been absent from her life. But it was a start. The social worker told Lisa the visit had gone well, that they could schedule another one for the following month. On the drive back to the sober house, Lisa was quiet, processing. Finally, she said, "I want to show you something." She pulled out her phone and opened a photo album. It was full of pictures she'd been taking over the past few months. Street scenes, people at the coffee shop, sunrises from her bedroom window. But the last picture was different. It was a selfie, Lisa standing in front of a mirror holding a chip. 6 months sober. I got it at my meeting this morning, she said. I wanted to wait to tell you in person. David felt his throat tighten. I'm proud of you, Lisa. I couldn't have done it without you, she said. I know I said I hated you for not stopping me that night, but you were right. I had to choose this for myself. Nobody could choose it for me. They pulled up to the sober house, but before Lisa got out, David reached into the back seat and pulled out a small wrapped box. What's this? Lisa asked. Open it. Inside was their mother's pearl necklace. Lisa's hands flew to her mouth. I've been holding on to it, David said, waiting for the right time. I think now is the right time. David, I can't. I pawned it. I betrayed your trust. I don't deserve. It's not about deserving, David interrupted. Mom gave this to me to keep in the family. Your family, Lisa. You always have been, even when things were at their worst. And I think Mom would want you to have it now, as a reminder of how far you've come. Lisa held the necklace carefully, running her fingers over the pearls. I'm not going to wear it yet, she said quietly. Not until I feel like I've really earned it back. But I'm going to keep it somewhere safe. As motivation, she looked at her brother. Thank you for not giving up on me. Even when I gave up on myself. They sat there for a moment longer, the car idling, both of them thinking about the long road that had brought them here, and the longer road still ahead. Later that evening, David sat in his living room with a cup of tea, the same spot where he'd been sitting when Lisa had first shown up 6 months ago. His phone buzzed with a text. It was from Lisa. A picture of the necklace sitting on her dresser propped up where she could see it every day. And below it a message, I'm going to make her proud. I'm going to make us both proud. David typed back. You already are. He understood now what his therapist had been trying to tell him all along. Love wasn't about protecting someone from every consequence. It wasn't about fixing their problems or carrying their burdens. Sometimes love meant stepping back and letting someone fall, trusting that they had the strength to get back up. Lisa still had hard days ahead. Recovery was never simple, never linear. There would be more struggles, more close calls, maybe even setbacks. The statistics weren't encouraging. But Lisa had something now that she hadn't had before. She'd made the choice herself. She'd chosen life, chosen recovery, chosen to fight. And David had learned something too. He'd learned that you could love someone completely while still maintaining boundaries. You could support someone without enabling them. You could be there for someone while still taking care of yourself. The necklace had come full circle, but it meant something different now. It wasn't just a family heirloom anymore. It was a symbol of redemption, of second chances, of the hard work of recovery. Lisa hadn't earned it back by being perfect. She'd earned it back by showing up, by doing the work, by choosing hope even when it was hard. David looked at the empty couch where Lisa had collapsed that rainy night 6 months ago. So much had changed since then. But the most important change was the one he couldn't see. The one happening inside his sister's heart and mind, one day at a time. He finished his tea and got ready for bed. Tomorrow Lisa had an early shift at the coffee shop. Next month, another visit with Amy. Next week, another family session. One day at a time, one moment at a time, building a life worth living. That's all anyone could do, really. Show up, do the work, choose hope, and trust that sometimes the hardest decisions, the ones that break your heart in the moment, are the most loving ones you can make.